So my name's Damien Tessmann, and I'm the fifth generation of my family to live on our family farm at Coolabunnya. We milk 130 cows there, and I guess like all country kids, we were involved in the dairy industry and like child slave labour, you might say. And from there, I worked on the farm while going through school. Did all my schooling here in Kingaroy and Coolabunnya, and then after I left school, I did a bit of work whilst studying externally to the University of Southern Queensland, before then putting my hand forward to go into local government at age 21 in 2008. So I've had a rich history with the 5 generations of my family that have been here. This is a region we've called home, we've pioneered it, and I really feel that desire to keep following in my family's footsteps to make this region even better. Well, after 8 years being on council, I saw there was an opportunity for myself to be able to implement the kind of things that I've been talking about over the last 8 years. Obviously, with Mayor Wayne retiring, there's an opportunity to be able to move into that role. But as I said, I think I'm a representative leader of this community. I've been all around the region as a councillor. I haven't just stayed in my own division as some others do. I've got out and got the passion. I've got a passion as large as this room for this region, and it's on that reason that I put myself forward to lead this region, to be able to go down to Canberra and fight for our fair share down there, to have the conversations with George Street, as well as being able to deal with all the issues that local government deals with on every single day. That's the passion that gets me out of bed every morning. Full disclosure, my father is chairman of the Kingaroy Concerned Citizens Group, which is the group of landholders that were formed in 2010 to fight the Cougar Energy underground coal gasification plant. So from my point of view, being a resident of Coolabunnya, a lifelong resident, I know how important agriculture is to this region and how strong of an industry it is at Coolabunnya. So to be able to have a mine come along and sit not only so close to Kingaroy, but right in the middle of our prime agricultural land in this region, I think we've really got to have a strong conversation with the state government and particularly the Minister for Mines to work out just how fair dinkum are they about approving this. This mine is tearing our community apart. To get 1,000 people turn up at the Kingaroy Town Hall to have a say about this mine is a pretty strong indication of just how upset and emotional people are. It's no good the community continuing to go down this line of this emotional drag if the minister, as I say, is not fair dinkum. So if elected mayor, that's one of the first ministers I want to talk to and get a clear indication just where the state government stands on this and let them know that our region is really against it. Well, one of the great unique things that the South Burnett Regional Council has is that we own a lot of industrial land as it stands today, particularly around Wandi. So my plan would be to go down to the southeast corner where we know there's a lot of industry that's really growing and has growing pains, and that's high infrastructure charges, high land costs, traffic congestion, all of those issues that are going on in the southeast corner. If we can go down to those industries down there and say, we've got land that council owns, we're prepared to sell it to you for almost next to nothing. Because if you're bringing a business here that has a lot of employees, you're going to inject into our local economy. The other thing we need to do is make sure we've got a streamlined council. If there's one thing that really excites private enterprise, that is a council that wants to power through the bureaucracy. If we've got such a business that wants to come and move to a place like Wandi or Kingaroy, we've got to be able to get their town planning application, put it on top of the pile to get it through there. We can have a conversation about headworks charges. We can have a conversation about rate holidays, because there's a huge capital cost involved when any business wants to relocate. So we can have that to try and make it easier. That's the kind of thing I think we can do. We've also got to remember is there's a lot of other communities out there that can argue that they're only 2.5 hours away from the southeast corner. We've got to figure out ways that separate ourselves from our competitors. And I think if we can demonstrate to the private enterprise that we are a council that means business, when it means cutting through red tape, I think that's going to get the attention of those businesses down in the southeast corner. And if there's one thing that I'm really passionate about, That's getting through that bureaucracy and red tape. Well, one of the great industries that we have in this region is agriculture. I think we've got to be able to work with our farm leaders that are in this community about knowing what we can do to try and increase productivity. That's why I'm really passionate about the $100 bounty for wild dogs. If there's one thing that's going to boost our productivity, particularly in this climate of high cattle prices, is attacking pests like wild dogs. So I've got an idea of how we can do that fairly and still get a really great outcome. I think the other thing we've got to do, as I say, is make sure that our council is free of the red tape. As I say, that is the one thing that I think really excites private enterprise, is government that gets out of the way. And that's what I want to be able to do. Get council off builders' backs, off developers' backs, to be able to encourage that growth. And that's what's going to separate us from the rest of the state that's looking for the same thing that we're looking for. We're not unique in the situation where we are today. We've got to remember that. And the one thing I think we can do is really power through that and get council and all those things off people who are wanting to do great things and invest in our region. Well, clearly it's our lifestyle and our pace of life here. We all enjoy the natural beauty that we've got, places like the Bunya Mountains. We've got our recreation with the dams, but we've also got things like wineries. People live busy lives these days. We've got that slow pace of life, that country lifestyle that so many other places really, really want. And I think that's the kind of thing we've got to preserve. We know it as one of our strengths, and council, I think, has got a role in playing and preserving that, as well as our natural recreation places that we've got. Those are the positives. Well, one of the negatives, I think, is we've really got to embrace the technological age in this region. That's what's going to boost our local economy, it's what's going to boost our retail sector and mean more prosperity right throughout this region. So I think if we really grab a hold of the technology and continue to boost our industries around here, particularly our tourism industry, that's got a real potential. I think we've just got to make sure that we maintain our road network, because obviously a lot of people are moving to this region from the southeast corner. So if we continue to make sure that we've got safer roads for people to drive on, that plays a big part in it too. Well, the Bunya Mountains Road is a state-controlled road, and that's one of the things that we've got to be able to have that conversation with the state government about, for them to be able to put money onto that road to get it to be sealed. The other key point and the key advantage for council lobbying for this is that we've got to continue to get a lot of grant funding from the state, from the federal government, to be able to keep our workforce employed. And it's on that basis, in addition to the tourism aspects of that road, that we need to be able to have that conversation with the Minister for Transport and Main Roads about making the Bunya Mountains Road a priority. We inject a lot of money into tourism in this region, and I think that's why we've got to make sure that we continue to enhance it and make sure that it's freely available and freely accessible to people who are wanting to come along and spend money here. The Nanango Weir is an issue that's been around for all of the 8 years that I've been on council, and I'd say it's probably been going on before I was even born in the early 80s. There's a couple of issues that are a real problem out there. The first one is the road. There's a gate right at the start, which is a number of kilometres down near the weir. As you go around one of the corners, there's a very sharp drop-off, 30, 40, 50 metre drop-off, that you can get one vehicle around that corner. If it's to be the new Coomber Falls, we are going to have a lot of traffic on that road. If you've got a car going this way, a car coming that way, there's nowhere for them to pass. To make sure that they could pass involves a lot of money being spent on that road. Now, I'm not convinced that that's our number one infrastructure priority in the next council term. The other issue, of course, is there's no toilets down there, there's no facilities at all. There's going to be a huge capital cost to be able to put that down there. We know at Coomber Falls, you've only got to go just up the road to Maidenwell to be able to use the toilets. There is nothing down there. It's a beautiful spot. There are platypus down there. There's not too many places around the South Burnett that have platypus and abundance of bird life, as well as the natural beauty that's there. I think we've got to continue to have a further conversation. If we are going to open it, there's going to be a lot of cost in there, and that's, I think, going to have to be a decision for the 7 councillors to make once the new term starts. The biggest thing that I think we've got to do is embrace the technological age. I know that when I went down to a wedding in country South Australia, I drove down the Great Ocean Road. Now, when I was down there, I never set foot in a visitor information centre. My mobile phone was my visitor information centre. I could download an app that told me where I could see the whales at Warrnambool and the penguins at Point Fairy, all of those sort of things. We in the South Burnett, we just don't seem to have that really strong technological presence in relation to our tourism industries, our hospitality, all of those kind of things. I think council's got a role as being a leader there to be able to say to our business community, our tourism community, let's get fair income. Let's make sure that we've got businesses that have standard opening hours of the weekend when people come here. Let's have a conversation about being able to book online a lot of the things that we've got, and let's have a real discussion about putting what we all as locals know are the great things to do in our region online. So when people are looking to get away for a weekend, out of the big smoke, they can simply go online, www.tourism South Burnett, any kind of website like that that is going to bring up everything they can do. That's the kind of thing that I think in this technological age, council can have a say over. The other thing I think we've got to do is continue to promote our recreational tourism opportunities, particularly with Boondooma Dam and Bajelki-Peterson Dam. Could you imagine the reaction we'd have down in the southeast corner if we had huge billboards that had, you know, mum, dad and a couple of kids standing there with a great big yellow belly or a great big bass that you can catch in BP and Boondooma down at Redlands Bay that says, are you sick of catching whiting? Because that's all you can catch down in those places now with the green zones and the environmental regulation that's really creeping into recreational fishing. There's a huge opportunity there. We've got 2 of the best dams in this state to be able to fish out of, and I reckon you're just about guaranteed of catching something bigger than little old whiting out of, say, Maroochy, the Maroochy River, or, you know, in Moreton Bay. Those things really pushing our recreational industry, but as well as our technological advancements in relation to our tourism and hospitality. I know there's more than 5, but I mean, if we've got to pick the top 5, the Bunya Mountains is number 1. Our 2 dams, as I've mentioned, Boondooma and Bajelki-Peterson. I think if you're looking for wineries and great food, I don't think you could go past Moffedale Ridge as being a very clear leader and professional hospitality opportunities here in our region. And I think the other one, if you want something for everybody in the family, then Anango Energy Centre would be a great spot for the kids to come in, and when they fire up that old generator, it's something pretty special. I spent 4 years on the Kingaroy Police Community Consultative Committee, and that was all about the community and the police working together to deal with crime. Now, I know from my time on that, you know, crime is something that we've all got to be aware of. I've also been involved in the South Burnett Neighbourhood Watch in years gone by, so I've got an understanding of the issues that the community sees in relation to crime. Got to highlight though that crime and all that sort of thing is a state matter, and it's something that council can work with the professionals, being the police, to be able to solve. I think the other thing though to mention though is council's got a role in making sure that its residents feel safe. And if that means a further rollout of CCTV, I know at the moment council's really pushing for federal money for Mergen, for the installation of CCTV cameras and more lighting to make sure that people who are in the CBD of a night time feel safe. And that's the kind of thing that council can do, is really chase after those grants to get some money in to put those kind of things in. It's really amazing just how much of an issue drugs are, and not just our community but right across the state and right across the country. My own family, we've been affected by the drug ice. Now, it's not members of my family that have been using it, but it's people that we've known that it's had a huge impact on. I'm the first to say there is an issue out there. Council's got to be able to work with the police to make sure that the issue is minimised. I'll be honest, I don't think we're ever going to get rid of it, and I don't think we should aim for a goal as big as that, because we're just not going to get there. We've got to be smart about what we do, work with the police to minimise it and make sure that our youth particularly don't get onto it. But it's a really scary part when you talk to hospital staff right around the region. It's not just young people, it's middle-aged people, and it's even older people. It's a drug that is really making people's lives in this community hell, ice, and I think council's really got to support police who are doing their best to make sure that we all remain safe. I grew up in a family where violence was never an issue in the home. So for a lot of my life, I just simply didn't know that as to be a problem. As I've got to become an adult, and you listen to the people who are in the service organisations right around this community that are dealing with issues like that, clearly it's a problem. And I think what we've got to do is work with our youth to make sure that women are respected, to make sure that there's opportunities for those women who find themselves in that situation, that they've got somewhere to go where they're safe. And I've been able to put my money where my mouth is, so to speak. Being a member of the Kingaroy Rotary Club, we teamed up with the South Burnett Law Association, and we put on a breakfast late last year on dealing with domestic violence and on White Ribbon Day, and we raised thousands of dollars to go back to community organisations in our region that are dealing with this problem. That's the kind of thing I think council can do, is make sure that we can continue to fundraise, to support those who are professionals in looking after those who are suffering from an issue as serious as domestic violence and violence in the home. Clearly this is an issue that is really facing our region right at the moment. I've been on the board of the Kingaroy Private Hospital for the last 4 years, and I've had a front row seat to see how this issue has unfolded over the last 4 years. I've had some real concerns about council not only being the landlord but also being the tenant. And now private enterprises walked away from this facility over the last number of months. That sets off some alarm bells in the back of my mind. And is this something that ratepayers have got to now pick up the bill for? Particularly when we know that 25% of the community have private health insurance, but 100% of the community would be paying for it. Now, right in here, I don't know whether that's fair for all of those people who would never ever step foot in that facility. I think we've got to look outside the square of how we can get that building dealing with health issues that affect not just private patients but public patients, that everybody's got an opportunity to use that facility. Now there's some different ways that we can do that. I think we've got to continue to grow the number of specialists that are in there, as well as making sure that the health needs of our community are met. We're never going to have all of the health services that we're going to need, that people don't need to travel to Brisbane. We've got to realise we're not in competition with those other hospitals, but if we can provide what we can here that is affordable and potentially even generates a small profit, well, that's a positive. But if that means that we're not running it as a hospital where you go in and stay for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 nights, then that's something we're going to have to explore. And it's going to be an issue that's going to come up really quickly in the next term, because if there are going to be losses that need to be budgeted for, we've got to make sure that we have that decision made, I'd say by about May, to make sure that we know what the budget is going to be by the time it gets brought down in early July. There's a lot of work to be done over the next few months. The way council can have an influence is through advocacy. Obviously, public health is a state matter, and as I said, I want to be able to go down to these ministers as the first among equals, as the mayor from this region, to talk to the Minister for Health and find out just where Kingaroy Public Hospital is on the list. On the day that we were having the discussion about the community hospital and whether council would run it, it was the same day that the state government announced $70 million for the Roma public hospital. Now, I don't know about the rest of people out there, but I thought Kingaroy was the #1 capital priority according to the state government. So I want to be able to go down and talk to the Minister, talk to the Darling Downs Health Board to find out just where this hospital sits, because it's got a huge impact then on our community hospital. Because if that gets announced up the road here in Kingaroy, stating that that's going to be built, our new general hospital, why would anyone, even if they had private health insurance, why would anyone go into our older facility being the community hospital? So it's got a huge impact what happens with the general hospital on what happens at the private hospital. I want to make sure that we have that discussion with the Minister and continue to advocate for a new Kingaroy General Hospital. Well, clearly being able to get specialists like paediatricians, heart surgeons, all that sort of thing, again, is a state matter, but there's a role for the Mayor to be advocating to the Minister. The average man or woman on the street hasn't got that ability to be able to waltz into the Minister's office, bang on his desk and say, this is the issue that is happening in the South Burnett, this is happening in Wondai Hospital, this is happening at Mergen Hospital. But the Mayor has that ability. Doors open for the Mayor when it comes down to George Street as well as Canberra. So that's what I would say. If we know that we're struggling in those kind of areas, we need to be able to get down there, knock on the doors and be able to talk to the ministers who make decisions there. I also think there is an opportunity for whoever is the tenant in the private hospital for them to be able to continue to bring health specialists there as well. There's a two-pronged attack. We've got the public way as well as the private way. And I think those two match each other, complement each other to make sure we've got the best health outcomes for this region. I've heard plenty of times the deficiencies in this region in relation to mental health, particularly when somebody's having a mental health episode, when they're released from hospital, there's nowhere for them to go when they're still suffering from the after effects of their condition. So I think we've got to be able to have that advocacy role, as well as being able to support those organisations on the ground here to be able to deliver those kind of outcomes for mental health. It's an issue that is underfunded from both the state as well as the federal sphere, and I do think it's more of a federal issue from what I understand. We've got to continue to advocate for our region, be an inclusive region for those people who are suffering from the kind of mental health effects that are right across the spectrum, whether it's depression, schizophrenia, all of those kind of mental health issues, as well as our farming sector. And this is an issue that is really close to my heart, and that's the issue of mental health for our farmers. Every November for about the last 4 years, I've grown a horribly dodgy moustache, and I've put up with the rubbish from everybody about how terrible it looks, but I've done it because I believe in raising money for Beyond Blue, and I've got a personal story from where a farmer who lives not too far from where I live, it saved his life being able to talk to Beyond Blue at his darkest point and facing those demons. So that's the kind of passion that I've got for mental health. I've put up with all the barbs having a moustache during Movember, and if I'm elected mayor, I'm either glad or sad to admit that there'll still be a Mo for Movember, and we've got to raise that money. Well, I enjoy a beer, like so many of our people in our region. I don't know that we necessarily have a cultural issue with it, as some other communities do. We've got to make sure that police are equipped to deal with alcohol-fueled violence if it's there. I'm also a member of the Kingaroy Liquor Accord, which basically is a collection of all the hoteliers and licensees in the Kingaroy area. If somebody plays up and ends up getting into a fight, not only can they be banned from the premises where the fight occurred, but they can be banned from all the premises within the town. Now that has a huge deterrent factor in relation to alcohol-fueled violence, and I think we've got to continue to make sure that the other liquor accords in all the other towns are supported and encouraged. In relation to whether we've really got a cultural issue with it, as I said, I haven't seen the evidence that we do, but we've got to make sure that the services that are involved in that kind of stuff continue to be supported particularly through state and federal funding. As I said, I'm not convinced that there is a cultural issue necessarily in our community in relation to alcohol and alcohol-fueled violence, violence in the home related to alcohol. If that starts to occur in our community, obviously we've got to be able to work with the service organisations on the ground to deal with it there and support the professionals. Council just doesn't have enough resources to solve every single problem. We've got to make sure that we get the things that are in our sphere right, as well as being that advocacy role in relation to state and federal government for issues like that. It could always be better, there's no doubt about that, but we've got to start off young, particularly with young boys, in making sure that they respect women and the role that women have in the workplace, in the home, in the family, all of those kind of things. That's, I think, a key role if we start off young and continue to lobby the state government in relation to a program for boys and girls in state schools and in private schools related to respecting of women. But, as I say, I think it could always be better. From my point of view, I don't agree that we have a budget crisis in the South Burnett. You've got to look at where council has come from in the last 8 years. When the South Burnett Regional Council was formed in 2008, we were in the top, or the bottom 10, you'd probably say, of councils that are financially strapped and have some really big problems. Now, what council did was we were appointed a business development coach that came in, looked at what we were doing, looked at our costs, and we worked with that guy to be able to bring down our operational cost. And within a few years, we were out of the financially disadvantaged or the financially weak councils. And if you look now at those councils that were there in 2008, the South Burnett's not one of them, but there were councils who weren't in that list in 2008 who are there now and are really struggling to get out of it. We've made the tough decisions to be able to bring council to a financially sustainable level. We've still got some way to go. I don't think we need to have huge surpluses, because if we're turning over huge surpluses, what that says to me is we're taking too much money off the community. What we've got to make sure we do is we don't let expenditure outstrip revenue. We've got to spend what we earn and not more. We've got to make sure that what we borrow for is for the infrastructure for the future that can pay for itself, and not borrow for operational matters that some councils around the state have done, and make sure that what we are borrowing for is for things that is going to outlast numerous generations, like our sewage treatment plant, like our bridge program. That's the kind of stuff we should be borrowing for, not operational matters. As I say, we have made the tough decisions. They haven't always been popular, but I can tell you, when you look at the finances of the state and the federal government, they've let expenditure outstrip revenue, and that's where it catches up with you. And I don't want to see the South Burnett get into that kind of a situation that we're seeing with the levels of government that are supposed to be watching and regulating council. We can show them how to do it here in the South Burnett. Well, the examples that I can point over the last 4 years from where I've stood up for what I believed in relation to our finances is our borrowing program. Now, I've opposed $5 million worth of borrowings over the last 4 years. Now, the first one to talk about is the Blackbutt Town Development Scheme. I oppose that not because of the project, but the way that it was brought about. I don't run my farm waltzing into the bank 5 minutes before I want to spend something with no plan on how to do it. What occurred with the Blackbutt Town Development Scheme was that 2 weeks before a budget, the request came through to borrow $3 million for something that we didn't even have a plan for. I don't think that's the kind of bar that should be set when it comes to our finances. As well as in relation to memorandum, I opposed the borrowings for council to be involved in that, because I'm still worried that council ratepayers are going to be left with a huge bill in relation to those properties when the work, because what's occurring at the moment is that the council will build the roads and fix the drainage. We've borrowed $2 million to do that, and it'll be repaid by all the property owners within that estate. there's another $50,000 to $70,000 that are attached to those homes to be able to bring them up to a livable standard, and council's looking to then impose another $30,000 on that. I'm really worried about that. I'm really worried that we're not going to get our money back. That's the kind of thing we can do in relation to efficiency, is making sure that what we borrow for is something that is needed, because that's what puts pressure on the rates, the general rate. If you look at the general rate this financial year alone, 50% of the increase was related to that $5 million in borrowings that I said I didn't think we needed to do. I think we can get efficiencies by being smarter about what we borrow for. They are today in relation to our annual reports. Any person can look at them online. There's hard copies that are available, but we are also audited every single year by the Queensland Audit Office. Local government, out of all three levels of government, is the most audited. Everything from our money we spend on our road network, on our infrastructure, all the way down to councillors' wages and councillor expenditure and councillors' expenses and all that kind of stuff. We are audited. So if people think there is something wrong or we're not spending money right, that's where you can see from a public point of view what council is spending its money on. I think local government has always got to be transparent in the decisions that we make. But one of the best ways to be transparent is to go and collar your local councillor when you see them. There's 6 of them roaming around the region, as well as the mayor. If you don't believe that a decision has been made that's right, or you've got a strong view, go and collar them. I've had it all of my 8 years. Bail them up in the street, give them a ring, send them an email. They are the most accessible out of all politicians in this country, is your local councillor. So make sure that if you don't feel comfortable, don't just sit and stew about it. Go and talk to them about it. That's what they're paid the money for and why they've got to be accessible. Well, again, I think one of the great things you can do is talk to your local councillor about what the rates are being spent on if you think there's an issue. I'd really encourage people who don't believe that ratepayers' funds are being correctly spent or they've got an issue to go and look at the annual report. It's fairly easy to follow, it's not too technical, but also then really take the time to be able to talk to your local councillor. That really is the key part. They're the ones that are making the decision. At the end of the day, there's a myriad of legislation that local government's got to deal with that we've got absolutely no say over. The one thing that we do have a say over is what we spend the rates on. They're the councillors are the ones that make the decision on that. And if you've got an issue, go and talk to them, and grab them in the street, grab them wherever you can, and ask them, pretty frankly, what are my rates being spent on? I think there are always things that council can do better. We're not perfect by any means. I think in relation to our road expenditure, we've got to be able to move more money from some of our big ticket capital items back onto our road maintenance side of things. That's the kind of stuff that is impacting on people's lives every single day. So I think if we can get our capital projects where we're building roads to be on the kind of dirt road maintenance where we're always spending money, if we can seal that particular road or widen it by sealing the shoulders, what we're then doing is saving money when it comes that council's not out there always grading that particular road. If we get our capital and our maintenance to be able to talk to each other and be able to make sure that the projects we're doing is going to have a long-term saving for council in relation to our road maintenance, that's a key area where I think we can really make some difference. The road levy brings in $3.1 million. The reality is I'm not prepared to take that money off our road network as it is today. It's all about the revenue for me. So what I've said about the road levy is that we need to go back down to Canberra and talk to the government about where they cut our federal assistance grants, our FAGS grant. If we can get that money back that we only had 3 years ago before the road levy was brought in, I think we'd be in a far stronger position, and we could start to look at maybe making a step by halving the road levy as a signal to our community that we are fair dinkum about removing it, and then follow the next step once the funding, once the revenue is back. But frankly, I'm not prepared to simply cut it. I'm not prepared to simply then, cut the road levy and then say we'll pay for it by cutting a pool or a dump or all that kind of stuff. That simply is not going to generate the amount of money that we're going to need, and it's also then going to have a really negative impact in those communities. If we're fair dinkum about getting rid of the road levy, the only way we can do it is by getting that money back from Canberra that we lost, and then making the strides to do it. And I can tell you there is nothing more passionate for me in relation to our roads and our road funding than making sure that we get our fair share back to this community. The federal government is the one that raises 80% of all taxation revenue in this country. Local government's only somewhere around 2 or 3%, and yet we've got the network of roads that people use every single day. We're fair dinkum about increasing and getting a better outcome on our roads. The conversation's got to be had with Canberra, somebody who can forcefully put our point across while still being articulate, telling the ministers down there what the situation is happening up here in the South Burnett. And I know I can do that because I've done it before. I don't accept the notion that farmers don't get anything for their rates. If you look at the situation of where the road levy is spent, that 3.1 million is all spent on unsealed dirt roads. I don't see too many unsealed dirt roads in our urban centres. We've then topped that up through the general rate to get it to a bit over $6 million. The other key point though, and I really ask people to think about this, we've had a rollout program over the last couple of years replacing our bridges. We've had a number of bridges that have had load limits on it. We've even had a couple that have been totally condemned. I say to our cattle producers out there, our grain growers, could you imagine where you'd be if those bridges remained closed or with load limits on it? It's simply not a tolerable situation. If you look at the great effort the council went to in trying to replace Campbell's Bridge out at Silverleaf, where we're growing so much cotton out there, it put a huge impact, a 20-kilometre round trip extra with one bridge being out. Now I can tell you they're not just a couple of $100 or a couple of $1,000, they're a couple of 100,000 into the millions of dollars to replace those bridges. And that's what we're doing for our rural communities, to make sure that they can be as efficient as they can, to be able to get their cattle to market, their grain out to market, as well as being able to travel the roads and for school buses to bring children home in those rural areas. I simply cannot abide the comment that farmers get nothing for their rates when we spend so much on the transport network, and we've been doing it over a number of years now. We're coming to the final end of that bridge replacement program after such a long time. That's the kind of stuff that we're delivering in our rural areas, as well as the upgrades to intersections. I know in my own area of Coonabarabran, there was an intersection or a corner road that was the old boundary between the Kingaroy Shire and the Nanango Shire. It was dangerous. You couldn't see as it was a right angle, a 90-degree turn. With amalgamation, it's those kind of jobs that we can then get onto, because there are no internal shire boundaries anymore. And that was always happening in our rural areas. I believe we are delivering. I think we've got more to do in relation to our rural drainage, because so often as we drive around rural roads around this area, roads are being gouged out because there's just not a pipe there to allow the water to go underneath the road. I think it's about time that we really got fair dinkum about rural drainage. I know the places where I want to see it done, and I know the community know where those places are. That's the kind of stuff that we've done over the last 4 years, the last 8 years, that the kind of stuff that I've really championed as a rural-based councillor myself. But I know what we've got to do, and we've got to get more money into our rural drainage. From my point of view, I'm not an engineer. I've got no engineering qualifications, and I'm not prepared to criticise those who do, who are in the business of designing our roads and then doing the work out there. There's a couple of really key points we've got to remember when it comes to road construction is soil type. You've got so many different soil types right across this region, from red soil, black soil, sandy soil, the loamy soil, forest type of soil. Being able to get a road that sets in a sandy, loamy area like we've got at Geelong and Boondooma is hard. It's not the same as what a road will stay together in the red soil areas, say at Coonabarabran or Rurulan, or even indeed in our black soil country. That's the kind of stuff that occurs, and it's expensive, but we're just in those areas where the soil types aren't right, it's always going to be hard to keep a road together. In relation to our capital program of sealing roads, some roads and some soil types and some parts of the region need a lot of road base underneath there. Some need concrete on intersections, on floodways, all of that sort of stuff. But you know what? It comes at a cost, a very big cost. And that is often the determining factor in relation to a lot of this. We just simply don't have enough money to really make sure that what we're doing in particular areas is really going to stay together for the longest time. The other thing to point out is on our gravel roads, we've got to continue to process and progress our gravel resheeting program. That is putting new gravel back on gravel roads instead of just trying to scrounge what we can from the roadsides, the shoulders, back onto the road. There's a cost there too. But this is the kind of stuff. If we've got that commitment to doing it, I think we can make a difference. But we've got to be realistic, not just stick our head in the sand or say that councillors or engineers are lying. There is a real issue when it comes to the ability of a road to be able to be set in certain soil type areas. It's different wherever you go in this region. You can't deny that. It's just an engineering fact that we are where we are, and we've got to accept that. From my point of view, I'll be out there campaigning against the mine. I think the parking issues that we have in Kingaroy now aren't the biggest issue from my point of view. I think it's a really sad sign that myself, I can drive down Kingaroy Street and still find a park. That's a sign to me that our CBD, our retailers, are not doing as well as they could do. Now, I think it'll be a really great time when you drive down Kingaroy Street and you can't find a park. That's a sign that people are alive in our retail areas. The feeling in the CBD is alive. There's a hustle and a bustle there, and I think retailers will be doing it great. So that's what I think in relation to the car parking issue. I can still find a car park in Kingaroy. I don't want to, because that will be a sign that our retailers are really doing it well. To really be able to answer that question, you've got to split it out. You've got to have your urban areas, and then you've got to have your rural and rural residential areas as well, because they're both very different. In relation to our urban areas on the roadsides and the verge and the footpath, council just doesn't have the resource to be able to go around and mow at the front of everybody's places along the footpath. Could you imagine the amount of resource we would need to be able to do that? I think there's got to be that incentive for the property owner to be able to keep out the front of their place clean and tidy, to make sure that it's presentable not only for their own home but for the town that they live in. I know a lot of tourists, and I'm one of them. When I go to a town, I don't just drive down the main street to get an appreciation of a town. I'll take a left and then a right, drive through the back areas, and that's where you get a real understanding for what a town's like. I think that incentive has got to be there for people to be able to maintain what's out the front, because council just doesn't have the resource. In relation to our rural areas and our rural residential areas, it's a different story. Again, council's not going to come along and be able to afford to remove every single tree or all that kind of stuff. We can't burn every single roadside. That's why we have a process through there that if residents want to be able to do that we make it as easy as possible. Now, the reason we have permits to burn is that we do have a lot of rare and endangered species of trees in this region. There are some huge, stiff penalties if people burn them without realising that they're there. Ignorance and being unaware that something is there is not an excuse when it comes to the federal government and the Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act, the EPBC Act. You will be prosecuted. The process that council's got there is that our officers will come along, have an inspection. If there's no rare and endangered plants there, you'll be able to burn out the front of your property or be able to maintain it. There's a reason it's there. It's not to be over bureaucratic. I think council can be pretty lenient and pretty flexible as long as you tell us what you're wanting to do, and it's not going to impact on anything in relation to the infrastructure that's on the side of the road and that kind of stuff. Again, council doesn't have the resource though to go out and do it for every single ratepayer, because frankly you wouldn't get your rates worthy or your money back if we would go out and do that all the time. It would just be such a huge drain on our resources. You've got to remember, when it comes to roads, there are two buckets of money that we operate from. We've got our maintenance, which sits a bit over $6 million. Now, 3.1 of that comes from the road levy, and the rest is then topped up through the general rates. We've then got our road capital program that's made up of a bit of a mix of ratepayers' funds as well as money from the state and the federal government. So it varies every year in relation to our capital program. So we sit somewhere, I'd say an average of 10 million in relation to our capital works program. Now that's money that's coming from the state government in relation to TIDS, which is Transport Infrastructure Development Scheme. That's a 50-50 split, 50% from council, 50% from the state. The problem with that funding though is that every project has to go through what's called the Regional Road and Transport Group, or the RRTG. Now, at the moment, I'm the delegate from council that sits on that, and what that means is that I have a say on the road projects that occur in Bundaberg, or at Gayndah, or in Gympie. Conversely, the councillor from Bundaberg has a say over the projects in the South Burnett. Every project has got to go through that RRTG group. It's just a fact of reality. We've then got money that comes from the Roads to Recovery, which is a program run by the federal government, which is 100% federal government money that comes straight to local government that we spend on the priorities that we see. Now, over the last couple of years, it's been tripled as a commitment from the government, the federal government. We've got to continue to talk to the federal government about not just tripling it for 1 or 2 or 3 years, tripling it and building it on for the long term. Because again, this is part of the 80% taxation that's raised by the federal government coming back to local government for the priorities that every single person uses. So it's a bit of a melting pot of money that gets spent on the roads, and it's from those two sources: operational for maintenance, and then depreciation and grants for capital projects. So councillors always have the final say on what our money gets spent on, and it's made up of a variety of different reasons. We've got a methodology that we work out based on how many vehicles use it, how many residences are along a certain road in relation to the road hierarchy and in relation to transport routes. All of those types of things are all considered. We've also then, there's a political element there that comes in about an even spread across all of the council divisions. We also then try to get a balance between urban areas, rural areas. There's a whole variety of ways that it's figured out, but it's important to know that councillors make final say on what projects are, where the money's spent, and particularly also in relation to our grants funding, except for that TIDS funding, the Transport Infrastructure Development Scheme, which goes through the External Regional Road Group. Every other decision on what projects are spent are made by the 6 councillors and the mayor. The projects that we outsource are ones that council simply doesn't have the ability to deliver, particularly our bridge program. We don't have the equipment or the expertise on staff to be able to do that. So we put those projects out to tender, and we've actually had companies from Tasmania compete for works up here in the South Burnett. I mean, that's an indication, I guess, of how tough the environment is at the moment and how hungry contractors are for work. Also, if we've got an overabundance of capital work to spend, and we're not going to spend it in the specified timeframes by the state and the federal government, we'll put those projects out to tender. We put a lot of our footpaths out to tender because our concrete crew generally have got so much work to do, whether it be curb and channel or whatever, that they struggle to be able to then get around to the footpath program. So we'll put footpaths out to tender as well. We've obviously got the Memorandum estate is out to tender, but by the same token, council is a contractor in a way for state government funds, and that's what we're doing with the Kingaroy-Barkers Creek intersection with Clark and Swenson Road for the new entrance into Swickers. We had to make sure that we got that money because it helps keep our workforce employed, as it will if we can get the money for the Maidenwell Bunya Mountains Road as well. Those are the kinds of things. We've got to remember that we're a contractor in a lot of ways as well, and it's a pretty fine balance. It costs $5,000 a day to keep a grader crew going. A grader crew involves a grader, a truck and dog, a roller, a water truck, and all the staff and the materials that go with it. So there is a lot of incentive there for council to make sure that it spends the money wisely from our road network, and also to make sure that our employees are doing the best job possible. As I said though, we still operate as kind of a contracting service. We've got to be competitive to get that work from the state government. As I said, we've got it for the Kingaroy-Barkers Creek, Clark and Swenson Road intersection, and we've got to get it for the Maidenwell Bunya Mountains Road as well, because that's the kind of stuff that keeps our staff employed and lessens the burden on ratepayers and ratepayers' funds to keep those gangs rolling. So it's a pretty fine balance, but most of the work, a majority of the work, is done by our employees. Well, one of the key differences that's occurred over the last 4 years as opposed to the 4 years previously has been the fact that all of the councillors get in a bus and drive around and see a project face to face with all of the councillors there present to be able to discuss it as we go along. I think that's been a watershed in the way in which we choose projects. Councillors fully understand where the money's going, what it's going to do, and the difference that it'll make. As Mayor, I want to be able to continue to build on that precedent to make sure that with potentially 4 new councillors at least, that they've all got to fully understand and fully appreciate the projects that they're having a vote on. Some of these projects are in the millions. So from my point of view, councillors have to be engaged in the process to make sure that the decisions they're making are important. I still think we've got to look at our transport links, particularly in our rural areas. That's got to be a key part of what projects we choose. We've got to have a strong voice at a regional level on the regional road and transport group to make sure that we're putting our projects forward there and that we're convincing the other councils to tick off on our projects. That's why you've got to have a strong, competent voice, articulate voice at a regional level there. As well as, I think, just making sure that safety continues to be a big part of the process as well. And I think we're doing that at the moment, but we've got to make sure that that continues to be a pretty key part of what projects we choose. I'm very keen to know what's happening with CQU more. From my point of view, I see that at the moment is a presence here on the ground for the external students that are studying, that can go in and Skype their lecturers, and to be able to get that, not necessarily one-on-one contact, but be able to have that better contact with their tutors and their lecturers. So I'll continue to explore that more, and who knows where that may go from there. In relation to our education though, I sit on the St John's Lutheran School Committee, and that's a job that I've chosen to do because if there's 2 things that I think bring people to a region, and families particularly. It's health and education. We've got a great state school system here in the South Burnett, and I'm a product of it and a staunch defender of it. But we've also got great private schools that people can choose from, whether it's St John's, St Pat's, St Mary's or St Joey's. There's a wide range of strong private schools that deliver great educational outcomes as well. Choice is always got to be a very key thing, and if we've got those strong state schools, strong private schools, and even a tertiary education presence here in the South Burnett, I think it's really going to excite people to want to move here and take jobs here. I know over the last 4 years, traineeships and apprenticeships internally in council has been a big priority of ours. We're a major employer, and in fact, in some towns in the South Burnett, we are the major employer. So we've got a moral obligation, I believe, to make sure that we've got opportunities for young people in our region to be able to stay here. I think we've then got to be able to talk to industry that's here to make sure that they're giving opportunities. We've got some big employers, particularly in Kingaroy, Swickers, PCA, as well as some of the other bigger employers around the towns like Smithfield, out of Proston, of making sure that opportunities are there. We continually hear that there's not enough opportunities. I believe there isn't enough opportunities, but I think we've got to be able to have that conversation, and I think the Mayor can have that conversation with major employers in the region, trying to encourage them to make more opportunities available. Renewable energy is obviously going to be the future of energy in Australia. In this region, we still rely on coal. We've got Stanwell out there, and there's still got to be a place for coal. It produces such a huge amount of employment in so many regions. In relation to solar, there's a huge capital outlay to be able to put solar panels on roofs. We've got to be able to have that conversation. Is it a wise investment? Is it going to bring down the cost of electricity for council? Let's face it, we use a lot. We're paying for the bills of all the street lights, as well as running all of the chambers and everything that we do. I'm not 100% convinced that solar is going to have that impact on us. However, I'm more than prepared to have conversations with people who are really motivated and passionate about it, about how we try and increase the amount of renewable energy council uses. But we've got to remember is that at the moment, the way that technology is for renewable energies, it's still very expensive. And we've got to remember that when we're looking at what we put ratepayers' money onto. Well, I think one of the great things that we can do with our industrial land is make it available to businesses wanting to come here. Because at the moment, that land costs council a lot of money to maintain. But further than that, if you look at the land that's currently owned by private individuals, particularly in relation to agriculture, we're seeing a mass exodus of young people off the land. Now, in my family situation, I've got a younger brother and a younger sister, and my brother and I are as keen as mustard to stay on the land, but that unfortunately isn't the case for so many others. We've got really good arable land out there that is going to waste because the returns aren't there in agriculture. The other issue we've got is we've got a lot of ageing farmers that are relying on having that land as being their superannuation, and they're not being able to realise the true potential of that land because it's just so expensive to be able to sell to hobby farmers and the like. So we've got some real challenges in making sure that the land in our 8,500 square kilometre region is at its most productive, to make sure that we've got the returns coming back, as well as making sure that land that council owns is put to good use. We're not just sitting on it and paying to have it maintained. It is going to be an issue into the future. To be honest, in relation to renewable energy and continuing to develop it, it's not something directly in council's sphere of involvement and influence. Obviously, those incentives are always going to be in the control, I would say, of the Commonwealth particularly, but also to a degree in the state government, and we've seen that with the solar rebates and all of those sort of programs that that Anna Bligh particularly rolled out. From Council's point of view, if there's an opportunity for us to uptake on some of it, where it's going to have potentially cost-saving measures into the future, I want to hear about it, but I'm not just going to go down the line for political expediency if it's going to have a dramatic impact on costs in relation to the operation of Council. I'm totally in support of it, there's no doubt about that, but there are some pretty key challenges with it. We've got to make sure that the question that is asked is one that is most definitely going to be get up. There's no point in trying to make it political, because that's when it is going to fall apart. You've got to be able to have the support of both the coalition and the Labor Party federally, because as we've seen in the past, if it's not bipartisan, it falls over. Now, if it falls over, what message does that send to the Indigenous communities, not only locally but across the world? So let's make the question as simple as possible. We all support having our Indigenous brothers and sisters recognised in the Constitution, but I just say to our political leaders, stop with the politicking, make the question as simple as possible so we know it can get up, and I think we can really move forward uniting Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities together. Well, there's a really interesting history lesson here when it comes to the way the Constitution was framed in the 1890s in the run-up to 1901, when we all became, all the states federated to become the Commonwealth of Australia. From my understanding, that particular clause was in relation to penalising Queensland and Western Australia, who didn't count full-blood Aboriginals in their population. As crazy as that seems to us here today, I believe what the framers of the Constitution were on about with that is saying if Queensland and WA don't want to include full-blood Aboriginals in their population, they're going to have less federal seats and less federal presence in Canberra in the new parliament that was being created. So I take a bit of a different slant on it. Instead of seeing it as an inherently racist part of the Constitution, I actually think it was a way of penalising those states who were actively engaged in racism and trying to have that carrot approach to them being able to include Indigenous population in the vote, being able to vote and in the population. In relation to removing it, I'm not sure that we could necessarily include it in the recognition of Indigenous people, because that's going to be the best place for the Indigenous recognition is at the start in the preamble of the Constitution, rather than then trying to add another section, being section 25, to be removed. We've got so many anti-discrimination laws in place at the moment, and as far as I can see from section 25, it's related to state governments only, not individuals or businesses or whatever that can do that. It's only relation to the state. So the laws that we've got at the moment outlaw that kind of racial discrimination. There's a lot of cost in referendums. You've got to make sure that they're as simple as possible, and I think we've just got to accept that that part of the Constitution was there to actually penalise those states that were doing the wrong thing, rather than seeing it as something that's holding us back today, because frankly, it's not. I think there is a role for Indigenous communities to make sure that they preserve their languages. Now, unlike, I think, the Maoris in New Zealand, in Australia there was a vast hundreds of different nations that made up the population prior to European settlement. So the reality of being able to teach Indigenous language, like today Japanese gets taught, or Indonesian, really isn't going to be possible, because every language was different for each nation, Indigenous nation. But I think we've got to support those communities that really want to keep the language going, teach it on to the next generation of Indigenous leaders that are coming through. But also I think we've got to accept that English has to play a role, because if we're going to if Indigenous people are really going to succeed to their full potential, there is a role in the mainstream society that are away from Indigenous communities where they can really be leaders. Look at the ones that have done great things. You know, we've seen Eddie Gilbert bowl Sir Don for a duck. You know, imagine if Eddie was in today's generation rather than back in the 1930s. What great things he would have been able to do. What about Harold Blair? You know, another Indigenous opera singer, tenor. You know, imagine what he would be able to do today if he was in today's generation. So I think it's a two-pronged approach. Yes, you've got to support it, but we've got to accept that every Indigenous nation had its own language, and the idea of being able to teach that in schools is really a struggle. If we look at, say, the New Zealand anthem, where there's the Maori version is sung first and then you've got the English version, which Indigenous nation is chosen as being representative of the entire nation, that then Advance Australia Fair is sung in that? All those challenges are there. So I think they've got, each Indigenous community, if they want to be able to teach it, I think it should be supported. I think the South Burnett is probably the only council that has an Indigenous community so close, well in our case right in the middle. It's a donut council. The South Burnett totally surrounds the Cherbourg Aboriginal Shire Council. They really are part of the South Burnett, there's no doubt about that. I think we've got to continue to work with the Aboriginal Shire Council and try to make sure that we support efforts that they're doing to try and create employment. We've been very conscious about ensuring that we employ a number of Indigenous people that come through into the council, whether they're out on the road gangs or inside doing office jobs or whatever. We've got that philosophy. If you look at Mergen, for example, where would Mergen's economy be if it didn't have the Indigenous populations so close to it? They really are a crucial part of what we do in the South Burnett. As I say, I want to really see who's going to be the mayor of the Aboriginal Shire Council, Cherbourg Aboriginal Shire Council, and whoever that is, and if I'm in the role here, let's have a meeting every quarter where we go to Cherbourg, they'll come to Kingaroy or Denango, Wondai-Murga, where we have our meetings, talking about how we can boost it. But the way their council is structured, it is different. The state owns all the land in Cherbourg, nobody pays rates, their entire budget is reliant on money that comes to it from the state, whereas ours is different. They don't have the same road challenges that we have. So whilst we've got a lot in common, we've also got a number of very key differences. Where we can work together, I want to explore and really exploit for both our benefit as well as Cherbourg's benefit. Well, clearly, I think the best way we can do it is continuing to have a stronger web presence for so many of our businesses that are reliant on tourism in the region. Council's got that leadership role. Now we've got revenue, we've got money. We send out invoices every quarter to everyone in this region to pay us money. The decision that we have is what we spend it on. I see a benefit from starting to use some of that money to further grow the pie that is the South Burnett's economy, rather than trying to spend it on an economic development plan here or a tourism strategy there. Let's start to grow the size of the pie. The way we do that is for businesses to get bigger, to get more stronger, and the way we do that is embracing technology. So many in our region don't embrace technology like they should, and that's purely a decision for them. But if we're going to continue to grow, society is not going to stop for us because we're struggling to keep up on technology. I had an iPhone 4S, and I remember that when it first came out, that was the time I got a new phone, so many people were jealous that I had a 4S. Nobody has a 4S these days. It's old news. That's how quickly technology is advancing. If we want to be ahead of the curve, we've got to start to embrace it now, and Council's got that leadership. I want to be able to develop a South Burnett app that people, in relation to tourism, that when people come here, everything is online for them. That doesn't mean we get rid of our visitor information centres. They've still got a strong role to play. But we've got to embrace that technology. Even in the RV Association in Queensland now are bringing out their own GPSs that has everything already pre-built into it, to me that says there's a sign that VICs are going to struggle going into the future. We've got to look at how we make those VICs more cost effective and more relevant, because it's not going to be all that much longer and they're really going to be struggling to get people through the door. So those are the types of things we've got to understand, embrace technology to not only save us money but to grow the economy, grow the pie that is the South Burnett economy. Absolutely. Let's look at the ways we can cut down the amount of council vehicles that are driving up and down the Diagala Highway and up and down the Bunya Highway between chambers, when we could start to look at video conferencing as a way of being able to cut down the cost of all that travel. Now the reality is you're never ever going to be able to really replicate the benefits of a face-to-face meeting. But not every meeting needs to be that face-to-face. If we've got that equipment, that technology rolling out in each of the council chambers, I think that's a way of being able to make sure that, you know, we're starting to loosen the burden of that. Also, I think if somebody in Mergen wants to talk to a town planner, they shouldn't necessarily have to jump in the car and drive to Kingaroy to talk to a town planner, when they could go into, say, the Mergen office, book in a time to use the video conferencing and talk to one of our town planners in Kingaroy without either the planner having to travel to Mergen or the ratepayer having to travel to Kingaroy. That'd be a huge advancement for the delivery of local government services in our region, and something that we've really got to embrace, because this is the way forward. You can already now lodge your development applications online. That's a sign that things are changing in the local government delivery space. We've been really successful at council in getting the black spot funding for mobile phone black spots around the region. Now it's crazy to be able to drive up and down our main highways as we do, and for the phone to be able to drop out. Technology today is with Bluetooth and all that sort of thing, you can take a phone call while driving and for it to be considered legal without having to touch the phone. It's very frustrating when you're driving up the highway that it drops out. So I think we've got a role in continuing to get that money for our upgrades. We've got a number of towers around the region as well. There's NBN towers going in right around the region. So there is infrastructure there for telecommunication companies like Telstra, like Optus, to be able to come in and add technology onto those towers, the ones that we own, as well as the NBN towers, to try and eliminate the amount of black spots that we have. We've got a lot of them, but that's the kind of way that we can do it. Really engaging with those big telcos, as well as the federal government, to be able to eliminate black spots. I think we've always talked about going paperless ever since the introduction of computers, and we've got more paper now than we've probably ever had. I don't know that I'm prepared to make the big, prophecy that there will be no paper in the South Burnett Regional. There is going to be. What we can do is continue to work to try and minimise it, but we're never going to be able to do without it. We've just got to accept that. And just continue to try and make things as easy as we can for people. But I don't think it's been talked about for so long and it still hasn't occurred, so we've still got a long way to go. I've been a member of the LNP since its formation and a member of the National Party since I was 16, and I had that great enjoyment of being a member of a political party. Of some of my best times of my life, my best mates, I've met through the National Party and the LNP. When it comes to local government, there is a total divorce between my political affiliations and the very serious role that I have as a councillor. I've spoken out against the LNP government, particularly when they cut the money that we had for the Maidenwell-Bunya Mountains Road. I had no issue in calling out the minister at the time and saying this is totally unacceptable. And I've got no problem in doing that if I'm elected mayor. The great thing it has done for me, though, is be able to put me in contact and really close personal relationships, friendships with ministers and shadow ministers, so they're ones that potentially could be ministers if the government changes. I've been able to really make those great friendships, connections to be able to do it. But the other thing I'd say is that if you look at the great political relationships of, say, Peter Beattie, Labor, Campbell Newman, Mayor of Brisbane, LNP, one of the warmest relationships going. When Campbell Newman became Premier of Queensland, Paul Pasali, who is a Labor guy, very warm relationship with Campbell Newman. What I'm getting at is even people of opposite political persuasions can be friends and can actually really work well together. And just as a really interesting bit of trivia, still the only maiden speech that I've ever travelled to Canberra for to listen to was from a Labor senator who was a great mate of mine, who is a great mate of mine, from Victoria, who we travelled to America on a political delegation with. He is still the only speech that I've travelled to Canberra to listen to as a Conservative, surrounded by a bunch of progressive Labor members of Parliament, but that was our close friendship that we had. So, to be honest, the stereotypes you see in Parliament really aren't reflective of people of opposite political persuasions that have great warm relationships and friendships. Well, I've had 8 years as a councillor, and I've held some of the biggest portfolios on council, particularly the road portfolio. Roads are the number one priority for me personally, as well as I'd say 99.9% of the region. If we want to be able to make changes in that area, you need somebody who totally understands it to be able to hit the ground running day one, not spend 2 or 3 years trying to get your head around the quagmire that is road funding and how roads are delivered in the region. So I'd say that's a great attribute that I've got. I can hit the ground running. In relation to things like town planning, if you look at the great challenges of town planning over the last 4 years, I've been a strong, clear and articulate voice on those issues, whether it was Tabinga Downs and leading the charge about the impacts that it was having from the urban locality code, being able to understand that complex legislation to make an argument about why something should or shouldn't go ahead. And in that case, I believe that shouldn't have gone ahead. In relation to finance, the reality is you could be an accountant and you still would not necessarily understand the complexities that is local government finance today. It's so different. When you're talking about depreciation in say, a farm or a business, it's generally about trying to minimise your tax and all that sort of thing. Whereas in local government, depreciation is all about generating money, so you've got an amount to be able to spend on your capital works or your building of an asset or building of roads. So there's, just because you've got that, say, business experience externally, doesn't make you an automatic fit to go into local government. You've got to be brought up in local government to fully understand it and to actually, as I say, hit the ground running and not spend so much time trying to learn and understand things. When there's so many challenges out there, you need somebody with experience, but somebody also who's got the energy and the commitment to be able to do what is a 7-day-a-week job. And that's, again, the benefit that I've got being in the prime of my life, age-wise as I am. So you've got to have that local government experience. I just fundamentally believe that to really make a difference in the 4 years that you've got, which goes pretty quickly when it comes to trying to implement change. Change doesn't happen overnight. That's why you need somebody who knows what they're doing to be able to really lead and develop that. Well, clearly people don't like paying politicians. I totally accept that. The answer is it's not in our control what we get paid. There's an independent remuneration tribunal that sets the wages, and basically I think that's the way it's got to be. Politicians have got to be well and truly arm's length from what wages are being set. But just on the point, if you go back to before amalgamation, it cost $80,000 more to have all of the part-time councillors that the 4 former shires had, as well as the 4 mayors. If you were to take that entire bill and compare it to the bill today, well, in 2008, I'm not sure, it's probably a little bit less because the wages have moved up that little bit. But if you were to compare it, it actually was $80,000 more expensive before amalgamation. So I think there's got to be a bit of a reality check in relation to politicians and, well, councillors' wages, is that they're not exorbitant. And if you want somebody who is going to take time out of their business to be able to go to council meetings, represent council on all of the regional bodies that it does, the reality is you've got to pay somebody an appropriate amount of money for them to be able to do that. And I think the balance is about right when it comes to the South Burnett, and particularly then for the mayor's job. If you believe it's a 7-day-a-week job, you're always on call, you can't just simply expect the job to be done for $10,000. You've got to be realistic about it to make sure that you get the best people coming forward. Well, I think, again, I believe that the wages we're getting at the moment is about right. I don't think we need to move up any levels. I don't think we need to move down any levels on the local government pay scale. I think it's important that local government councillors still have access to a fuel card, because you'll get people that'll ring you up and they want you to come out and look at their road. And if you're travelling from, say, Mergen out to Boondooma or Kingaroy to Blackbutt, or Blackbutt to Proston or Boondooma, you've got huge travelling areas. So councillors have got to be able to be reimbursed for that. I think the phone bills, myself personally, I've got 2 phones. I've got a private phone and a council phone, because I've got a fundamental belief that ratepayers shouldn't pay for, you know, the work that I'm doing on the farm or what I'm doing in my own personal life or anything like that. That's purely expense that I pay, and then I have a council phone that I use for council business. So I think some councillors embrace that. I think I'm the only one that does have their own private phone, but if others, I'd encourage councillors in the new council to do the same thing. Separate your business, your private calls from your public. That's the kind of stuff I think is adequate and should be continued on in the new term. If there is corruption, actual corruption, I'd encourage anyone who has any evidence of that to go straight to the Crime Commission in Queensland. They're the ones that deal with all that sort of stuff. In relation to perceived, I'm not sure that we've necessarily got that perceived issue either, but again, I'd encourage people to come along, talk to the CEO about it, or go to the Crime Commission if you've got evidence of it. But as far as there being there, until I see some hard evidence of it, I think when you look at the way council is over-audited, over-regulated, if there is any corruption, even a sniff of it, it'll get picked up by the external auditor that council has on the audit committee, as well as the Queensland Audit Office itself. So there's a lot of safeguards in place to make sure that if there is that level of corruption, it's found out pretty quickly and people are held to account. There's no tolerance level for any form of racism in the South Burnett, in Queensland, or in Australia for that matter. Now, unfortunately, there's always going to be individuals out there that say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, are filled with hate and all of that sort of stuff. I think those individuals, I don't know how we deal with them, to be honest. I mean, they're bigoted people that we just can't help. I think we've got to continue to grow our multicultural part that is in the South Burnett. I sit on the St John's Lutheran School Committee, and even though it's a Christian school, there are Muslims who go to that school, children of people who practice the Muslim faith, and they're accepted and I think given a quality education and an environment that feels safe. I think that's the kind of thing that we've got to continue to promote. Call out those people who do it, who engage in racism, because all it does is make the South Burnett a less attractive place for people to come to. We've got to do everything as a collective community here, a collective society, to be able to stamp it out. I think that's the way we do it, is for everyone to do their part. Well, obviously, council's got to have a role in that, particularly on things that the public are using every day. Now, I can give an example of the footpaths in Kingaroy. We know there's trip hazards there, but also to enable to try and minimise those kind of issues that have come along, we've got to get in there and replace it, as well as trying to make the CBD a more attractive place to be. But the encouragement I would say to people is if you see something, you see it as an issue, council's got a number of workplace health and safety officers that can go through the process to make sure that that issue is rectified. Don't just simply throw your hands up and say, oh, bloody council doesn't do it. If we don't know about it, there's not much we can do about it. So that would be the encouragement I would give, is report it. We've got processes in place, we've got a number of people involved in that sphere to be able to sort those issues. Well, clearly there's got to be a balance achieved between common sense but still not allowing dangerous practices to occur. And I think how we do that is making sure that people that are in those workplace health and safety roles have that level of common sense, but the community understands that it's got a role to play in not only reporting things, but not doing the kind of dangerous things. I think sometimes council gets seen, because it's a government body, it's full of money and it can be that kind of pinata for legal cases and all that sort of thing. Because there is a perception that council's there, we've got to make sure that we've sharpened our pencil as far as eliminating all of the risks that we can. But as I say, the community's got that involvement as well, and we've got to accept that sometimes we do have to do things differently, like we've done with the drainage scheme in Blackmud, as I mentioned. It takes longer to do that job because we've got the workplace health and safety things in there. But I want to make sure that all of our employees go home safe. The way they turned up in the morning is the way they go home at night. And the way we do that is making sure that we eliminate all of the risks. But we've got to be sensible about it. And I think that can be achieved by having the right people in our workplace health and safety officer roles.